Hi, I'm Ranjit, and in this video, I'll be explaining how the pipe works in the backend. If you don't know what I'm talking about, if you don't know what the pipe is, I recommend that you go back and watch my first video in which I explain what the pipe is and how to use it and all that stuff. So you need to watch that video to make sense of this video. Excuse me. So, okay, the pipe has three main components. The first component is, let's call it, well, we're not deciding the name now, but collector. And the second component of the pipe is the pipe itself. So here, when I say the pipe, okay, the pipe itself. So let's just label it. And the third component of the pipe is the emitter. Okay, so the collector, okay, well, let me just switch back to the source code and show you what I'm talking about. So if you followed the links to the source code from the descriptions of either of the videos, you will end up at this GitHub repository. And each of these folders is a project. So these four are pipe for Dynamo, pipe for Grasshopper, pipe for Revit, and pipe for Rhino, or plugins for those respective softwares. Rhino pipe converter, I'll get back to this later. These two are applications for testing some of the functionality that I used early in the process. This is just a PHP script that handles the web pipe. This is by web pipe, I mean, in the first video, I send the data to a URL through a post request, and there's a PHP script on that URL which knows what to do with those requests. And this is that PHP script. It's a small script. We'll take a look at it later. Now, let's start with taking a look at the pipe data model. So if we go into that project and go into the types subfolder, you'll see the interfaces iPipe collector, iPipe emitter. So these are what I'm talking about here when I say emitter and collector. So let's go and take a look inside iPipe collector. There's just one method, data node. It returns a data node, and the name of the method is CollectPipeData. So I'll just write the method signature here, data node CollectPipeData. And let's go back and take a look at the iPipe emitter. It also has one method. It doesn't return anything, but it takes a data node as a parameter. The name of the method is emitPipeData. Okay, no, that's not what I wanted to do. Okay. So the reason we have these as interfaces and we don't have the definitions of those functions is because the exact logic of collecting the data and emitting the data depends on the application that's sending the data and application that is receiving the data. So we will get to defining that logic later when we are writing pipe plugins for specific applications. Now, what is data node? So I'll go back up a folder and go into the data tree folder. So this is where you will find the data node class. So data node represents a tree data structure where each data node contains a list of child data nodes, and each of them can contain, I mean, it doesn't necessarily contain, the list could be of size 0, but yeah, it can contain a list of children data nodes, and each of them can further contain another generation of data nodes. So that way, a single data node actually represents a tree data structure. And this is the main, this is the format in which the pipe communicates the data. This is the object that's being sent over the pipe. And each node can contain an, uh, an instance that implements iPipe member type interface. Uh, so this interface is implemented by all the data types in the pipe data model. So all the geometry data types of lines, polylines, curves, NURBS curves, planes, vectors, arcs, they all implement iPipe member type directly or indirectly. Or in some cases, and parent class implements the interface and other classes inherit from the parent class. So, okay, so that covers the data tree, data node class. Now let's talk about the pipe in itself, the middle part. So this part is inside the application that's trying to send the data. So this collects the data from the application and converts it into data node and returns that data node object. The center part, pipe, has some sort of some way of persisting this data, temporarily until it can send it to the emitter, and the emitter takes the data that is sent. Oh, I forgot actually. The emit pipe data takes a parameter, data node, takes the data, and so the meaning of emitting depends on what application we're talking about. For example, in Grasshopper, emitting implies we set the geometry to the output parameter of the component. In Rhino, emitting geometry implies that we add the geometry to the document. So it runs the emit pipe data function, and that the definition of the function, depending on the application, does what you need to send the data to the user, like show the data to the user. Now, I'll go ahead and talk about the pipe itself. The pipe is an abstract class, and it implements 3 methods. Push data, sorry, close pipe. Let me verify the signatures. Yep. Okay, push data actually takes data node as a parameter. So yeah, these 3 are the abstract methods. And if you look at the update method, this update method actually makes the pipe do what the pipe does. It makes the pipe transfer the data. So the update method sees whether the collector object, which is an iPipe collector instance, is not null. And if it's not null, then it calls the collector object's CollectPipeData function, which returns a data node, and it passes that data node to the push data function. So the push data function it's meant to push the data from the collector to the pipe. And the pull data function is meant to pull the data from the pipe to the collector. So it collects the data from the collector and passes it to push data function, and after that, it sees if the emitter of the pipe is not null, and if it's not null, then it calls the emitter's emit pipe data function and supplies whatever data that is pulled from the pipe. So the reason we don't define the functions push data and pull data here is because a pipe could be anything. So this pipe could be a pipe that sends data over the internet, or it could be a pipe that sends data using the computer's RAM as computer's memory as a medium of exchange. These two are the examples that I showed in the first video. Or you could have your own pipe which plays the data like as a sound through the speakers, and you have another computer listening to that sound, picking up the sound with a microphone and converting that into geometry. I mean, that's a pretty wild example, but in theory you could have a pipe do that. So that is the reason the pipe class itself is abstract. The logic of pushing the data or pulling the data depends on what kind of pipe it is. If you want to implement that crazy example of, sound pipe where it's playing the geometry through the speakers, like some sort of Morse code or something, the push data function would actually make the speakers play the geometry, and the pull data function would actually make the microphone listen for that sound. So if you're instead sending the data over the internet, the push data function would send like a post request or something, and the pull data function would send another request to a server and get the data. So if I go back and look at WebPipe, that's what WebPipe is doing. WebPipe implements the push data function. So it's serializing the data into a string. It doesn't matter what kind of serialization, as long as the serialization and deserialization functions match. And it's adding that to a name value collection and then posting that to the URL. That's pretty much what it's doing. And the pull data function, which is over here, it's actually sending a GET request to the same URL and deserializing whatever the string response it gets and returning the deserialized data node. So that's how the pipe works. If you can go through this local named pipe, which uses the computer's memory to exchange the data, and you can go through the push data and pull data implementations of that class. You can see that it's putting the data in the computer memory, and in pull data, it's getting the data from computer memory, deserializing it, and returning it. So that's how pipe works. We call the CollectPipeData method, take the return data node and pass it to the push data method. And on the other side, we call the pull data method, and okay, this actually returns data node. We take the returning data node and pass it to the emit pipe data method, and that emitter gets the data, shows the data to the user somehow, depending on whatever the application is. Now, there's one more aspect to this, which is conversion. So in Rhino, say you have a bunch of geometry, lines, polylines, whatever, and you have a bunch of different geometry in Dynamo. So the data models for geometry in Rhino and Dynamo are different. So you need an intermediary data model that you can convert to and from. So if I go back into pipe data model and types, there's this folder called geometry. Well, in fact, outside this folder, there's this file pipedata.cs. In there, you will find classes pipe integer, pipe number. This is for decimal double values. Pipe string. This is for strings. So they all implement ipipe member type, like they all implement that interface. So that allows them to be stored in a data node. And if you go inside the geometry subfolder, you'll find a class for vectors, a class for planes, a class for meshes. And if you go into the curve folder, you'll find a curve abstract class and all the other types of curves that inherit from the curve abstract class. So whatever application you're getting the geometry from, you need to convert that geometry into instances of these classes, because these classes implement iPipe member type. Pipe knows how to serialize them and all that stuff. So you need to write those conversion functions. So that conversion is done by this pipe converter object that's in this file. So you can go through the source code of this class to understand what's going on, but let me try to explain roughly what's happening. So I'll talk about a concrete example. Let's say the application that's trying to send the data is Grasshopper. So the Grasshopper component is collecting all the data, and I'm going to represent conversion process with this diamond-shaped, rhombus shape. So it's taking all the inputs, flattening them, and converting all the geometry in the inputs to the geometry types of the pipe, classes that implement iPipe member type. And then because the inputs are flattened, you get a list. It's creating a one level deep data node tree structure where all the children nodes are the list elements. And then it's passing that data node with all the children nodes to the push data method. The CollectPipeData method is doing that. Let me show you where that's happening. If we go back into pipe for Grasshopper, binary pipe sender, you will see a method called CollectPipeData. Okay, there it is, CollectPipeData. So it's taking all the geometry that the user plugged into the component, converting each of those geometries using a pipe converter object. So this class actually, I think, implements, or I think it has a static function that calls a pipe converter object, converting all the geometry to the pipe geometry types, adding them as child data nodes, and then returning the parent node. So there's a reason why I represented the pipe converter object with a rhombus shape, and I'll explain that. Now this data node, okay, so this goes in there. So this data node is passed to the pipe. It gets serialized to binary or string or whatever, depending on the exact implementation of the pipe. In that crazy example, you could serialize the geometry to sound. And then on the other end of the pipe, it gets deserialized, then converted back to the geometry data types of whatever the receiving application is from pipe geometry types. And then it's, you show the results to the user here. Okay, so this is how the pipe works. So now let me explain how the conversion process works. Okay, so let's take the example of Rhino. So if we're trying to convert Rhino geometry to pipe geometry types, what we're trying to do is, we know that we're getting a Rhino geometry base object. So that's the base class in Rhino that's inherited by all the geometry types. And in the end, we want to convert it to a class that implements iPipe member type. But in Rhino, this geometry base is inherited by, there's like a surface class, there's a curve class, there's a mesh class, and the surface class has subtypes that inherit from it. The curve class has like NURBs and polylines and polycurves and lines and all that stuff, and so on. So whatever is the inheritance tree of the Rhino data model, that tree goes on until in the end you have these leaf nodes of the inheritance tree, classes that are not inherited by any other class. Same thing goes on in pipe. I'm not going to draw the exact inheritance tree because that's arbitrary. There's some kind of inheritance tree until you have a bunch of leaf nodes. Now, as a developer, you only have to provide the conversion methods back and forth between these leaf nodes. And the mapping could be many to one, one to one, one to many, whatever. Does not matter. So as a developer, you only have to provide these blue methods. Each blue line represents two methods, one, converting both ways. So you have to, in this case, you have to provide, say, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That makes it 10 methods. So you have to provide only 10 methods. And the pipe converter object knows which method to use when. It will traverse the inheritance tree and figure out which method to use. So if you have a fully fleshed out pipe converter object, you can pass it any geometry base object, like anything that inherits from geometry base, and you can be sure that you'll get back a class that implements iPipe member type, convert it to the appropriate class and everything. So this is how a pipe converter works. That is the reason I represented it with a rhombus, with a diamond shape. So, I mean, the conversion backwards from pipe geometry types to the application types is also, it will also work through the exact same mechanism. So let me actually show you an example of this. Let's go to Dynamo and see an example of how this works. So in Dynamo, there's this, in the Pipe for Dynamo project, there's this folder named converters, and there's the Dynamo pipe converter. So in Dynamo, there's no one base class that, that all the Dynamo types inherit from. So I ended up putting object here. So instead of geometry base for Dynamo, I just put it in system.object because there's no one base class that is inherited by all the Dynamo types. So, okay, we're adding a converter that knows how to convert strings using delegates that can do the actual conversion. We are then adding a child, these are all child converters. So then we are adding a child converter which knows how to convert integers, conversion of doubles. And then we're adding this geometry converter as a child converter. And we're adding a converter that can convert meshes back and forth using these delegates. So let's take a look at what's inside geometry converters. So if you open that file up, there's a point converter, vector converter. They all inherit from pipe converter instances where the abstract type parameters are set to the application type and the pipe corresponding pipe geometry type. So when you're converting geometry, when you're converting curves, you will need to convert points like the endpoints or the center of an arc and things like that. So you supply a point converter to the curve converter, which it can use and delegate all its point conversion tasks to. So you have a converter at the top level, you decide which child converter to use for the next level. So you pick a path in this inheritance tree by making that decision. And at this next level, at the next level you pick another child converter that's appropriate. By making these choices, you're actually traversing a path in this inheritance tree until you reach a leaf node. There you will find a delegate that can do the actual conversion for you, and it will return the leaf node of the other inheritance tree, and then you can return that. So yeah, you can go through the source code in more detail if you have any doubts or concerns. But that's essentially how it works, from a top-down level. Yeah, and the conversion process is the same on the other side. So I think this describes broadly how pipe works. And if you're a developer that wants to implement, if you want to implement your own version of the pipe, you can just inherit from the abstract pipe class and then write your own logic of pushing and pulling. Whatever pipe you're implementing, the logic depends on that. And if you are a developer that wants to implement pipe for a new application, maybe you use SolidWorks and you want pipe for SolidWorks. I don't know if SolidWorks has .NET plugins. I don't know. But yeah, if that's the case, then you can inherit, you have to write classes that implement iPipe collector interface and implement that method, and classes that implement iPipe emitter interface and implement that method, so that the pipe knows how to get the data from the user and how to give the data to the user. Yeah, I think that concludes this video. And if you're a developer, I hope you find this video helpful. By the time you see this video and follow the links to the source code, I will probably have added a really nice README file documenting everything that I explained in the video with graphics and illustrations. I'll also try to comment out the code to make it more legible and understandable. You have to remember that this is still a work under progress. I'm working on this alone, and I put in maybe 30 to 40 hours of work total till now. So, yep, hope this video was helpful. Thank you for sitting through the long description of how pipe works in the backend.